Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Hall. The envelope had arrived at Hercule Poirot's London flat on a damp Tuesday morning, its cream vellum and precise calligraphy betraying wealth and intention. The sender, Lady Beatrice Ashford of Blackthorn Hall, requested his presence for a weekend gathering in Somerset. A modest assembly of distinguished minds, she wrote, to discuss matters of art, legacy, and perhaps a touch of mystery. Poirot, ever susceptible to flattery and intrigue, adjusted his moustache and accepted. Mysteries, he mused, were like fine wines, best savoured in the right company. The journey by taxi from the station was less than agreeable. The driver, a taciturn fellow with a penchant for muttering about cursed weather, navigated the winding lanes as rain began to patter against the windows. Poirot, clutching his silver-tipped cane, gazed at the rolling hills, their green dulled by the gathering storm. Blackthorn Hall emerged from the mist like a spectre of grandeur, its ivy-clad towers and mullioned windows exuding both majesty and menace. The centrepiece, visible even from the drive, was the ballroom's famed silver chandelier, its crystal prisms catching the last of the fading light. As the taxi crunched to a halt, a butler, tall, gaunt, and bearing the name Grayson, appeared with an umbrella. "Monsieur Poirot, welcome," he said, his voice as crisp as his starched collar. "Lady Beatrice awaits you in the drawing-room." Poirot noted the butler's fleeting glance toward the rose garden, where a figure in a dark coat vanished behind a hedge. "Curieux," he thought, filing the observation away. The entrance hall was a study in opulence. Marble floors, gilt-framed portraits, and a sweeping staircase that seemed to demand a grand descent. Lady Beatrice, a statuesque woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharper eyes, greeted him with practised warmth. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you," she said, her diamond brooch glinting. "We are honoured to have a mind so discerning among us." Her smile was flawless, yet Poirot detected a tightness at its edges, as if she were guarding a thought too dangerous to voice. The other guests were already assembled in the drawing-room, a cavernous space adorned with tapestries and a roaring fire. Lionel Ashford, Lady Beatrice's nephew, slouched by the mantelpiece, his boyish charm undercut by a sullen gaze. Madame Celeste, an opera singer whose sapphire gown matched her theatrical aura, sipped sherry and spoke in melodious French. Mr. Reginald Harrow, a financier with a hawkish nose and a habit of tapping his pocket watch, surveyed the room like a predator assessing prey. Rounding out the party were Miss Clara Vaughan, a young heiress with a nervous laugh, and Dr. Ernest Whitby, a retired physician whose genial demeanour seemed at odds with his guarded glances. Dinner was announced, and the party adjourned to a dining-room dominated by the silver chandelier, its countless crystals refracting candlelight into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Poirot, seated beside Madame Celeste, observed the interplay of egos. Lionel's barbed remarks about his aunt's obsession with legacy drew a sharp look from Lady Beatrice. Mr. Harrow's inquiries about the estate's finances were deflected with icy politeness. Miss Vaughan dropped her fork twice, her eyes darting to the windows as thunder rumbled closer. It was Grayson, serving the soup, who let slip the first thread of discord. "Old debts linger in these halls," he murmured ostensibly to himself as he passed Poirot's chair. The detective's ears pricked up. Debts? Financial? Or perhaps personal? He resolved to question the butler later, but the moment was interrupted by a crash. Miss Vaughan's wineglass lay in shards on the floor, her face pale. I thought I saw someone outside," she stammered, pointing to the rain-lashed windows. Poirot's gaze followed hers, but the garden was a blur of shadows. Lady Beatrice dismissed the incident with a laugh, yet her fingers tightened around her napkin. As the meal progressed, Poirot noted the undercurrents. Harrow's veiled jabs at Lionel's idleness, Madame Celeste's cryptic allusion to a past indiscretion, and Dr. Whitby's sudden silence when the topic of family lineage arose. The little grey cells, as Poirot called them, were already at work, piecing together the mosaic of motives. After dinner, the guests retired to the library, but Poirot lingered in the hall, his attention drawn to a heavy oak door at the far end. "The study," Grayson explained, appearing at his side. "Locked, as per Lady Beatrice's orders. No one enters without her key." Poirot nodded, noting the butler's hesitation, as if he wished to say more, but thought better of it. As the detective made his way to his room, the storm broke in earnest, lightning illuminating the rose garden. For a moment, Poirot thought he glimpsed the same dark figure from earlier, motionless beneath a yew tree. He closed his curtains, his mind alight with questions. Blackthorn Hall, with its glittering chandelier and shadowed corners, was no mere stage for polite society. It was a chessboard, and the first move had been made. Tomorrow, Poirot resolved, he would begin his inquiries. For now, he adjusted his nightcap and extinguished the lamp, the distant creak of a floorboard echoing in his ears. The game, as always, was afoot. Chapter 2. Shadows beneath the crystal glow. The dining room of Blackthorn Hall was a spectacle of grandeur. Its long mahogany table gleaming under the silver chandelier's cascade of light. Hercule Poirot, seated between Miss Clara Vaughan and Dr. Ernest Whitby, adjusted his cufflinks and surveyed the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. The storm outside battered the tall windows, but it was the tempest within that held his interest. The guests, dressed in their finest, wore masks of civility, yet their eyes betrayed secrets as sharp as the cutlery before them. Lady Beatrice Ashford, at the head of the table, commanded the evening with the poise of a queen. Her emerald gown shimmered, but her smile was a carefully constructed facade. "To our distinguished company," she toasted, raising a glass of claret. The others followed suit, though Poirot noted the reluctance in Lionel Ashford's gesture. The young man slouched in his chair, muttered something about toasting to folly, before draining his glass. His aunt's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. The first course, a delicate consommé, arrived under the watchful eye of Grayson, the butler. Poirot's gaze fell upon his silver fork, its tines faintly tarnished, a blemish in the otherwise immaculate service. Curieux, he thought. A household of this calibre did not tolerate such oversights. He glanced at Grayson, who avoided his eyes, busying himself with the wine. Was it carelessness, or something more deliberate? Conversation, like the soup, was thin at first. Madame Celeste, her voice as rich as her sapphire necklace, regaled the table with tales of her Parisian performances. Her charm was directed at Mr. Reginald Harrow, who leaned closer, his hawkish features softened by her attention. Miss Vaughan, seated opposite, toyed with her necklace, her fingers trembling. Poirot caught her fleeting glare at the opera singer, a spark of jealousy perhaps. Dr. Whitby, meanwhile, seemed content to observe, his round face benign until he spoke. "Old houses like this," he said, swirling his wine, "carry the sins of the past in their walls." The remark hung in the air, heavy as the storm outside. Lady Beatrice's spoon paused mid-air, and Lionel let out a derisive snort. "Sins, Doctor? You mean debts, don't you? This pile of stones is drowning in them." "Lionel!" Lady Beatrice's voice was a whip-crack. "Mind your tongue!" The young man smirked, but his eyes were cold, fixed on his aunt. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed. Debts again. The butler's cryptic comment from the previous evening echoed in his mind. Was Blackthorn Hall's grandeur a hollow shell? As the main course, roast pheasant with truffle sauce, was served, the conversation fractured. Harrow pressed Lady Beatrice about the estate's investments, his tone polite but probing. "A chandelier like that," he said, nodding toward the glittering fixture above, "must be worth a fortune. Ever considered selling?" Lady Beatrice's laugh was brittle. "Some treasures, Mr. Harrow, are not for sale." Poirot's attention returned to the tarnished fork. He discreetly tested its weight, finding it lighter than its companions. A subtle difference, but significant. Had someone tampered with the silverware? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden flicker of the lights. The chandelier dimmed, then flared, casting eerie shadows across the table. Miss Vaughan gasped, clutching her napkin. "It's the storm," Dr. Whitby said, though his voice lacked conviction. Then darkness. The room plunged into blackness. The only sounds the howl of the wind and a sharp, muffled cry from the corridor beyond. Poirot's hand tightened on his cane, his senses straining. "Remain calm, mes amis," he said, though he doubted anyone heard him over Miss Vaughan's whimpering. Seconds later, the lights returned, revealing flushed faces and uneasy glances. Grayson reappeared, his composure intact but his eyes darting to the chandelier. Poirot followed his gaze and noticed something new. A single velvet glove, deep crimson, lying crumpled at the base of the table, directly beneath the chandelier's gleam. "Whose is this?" Lady Beatrice demanded, her voice sharp. No one claimed it. Madame Celeste's hand strayed to her wrist, as if checking for a missing accessory, but she said nothing. Poirot rose, retrieving the glove with a handkerchief. It was finely made, embroidered with a tiny silver thread in the shape of a rose. "A curious oversight," he murmured, slipping it into his pocket. The guests exchanged glances, each face a study in guilt or suspicion. Had the glove fallen during the blackout, or been placed deliberately? The meal resumed, but the atmosphere was brittle. Harrow's questions grew bolder, Lionel's retorts sharper, and Miss Vaughan's nervous laughter grated on the nerves. Lady Beatrice steered the conversation to safer topics, art, music, but even her authority could not dispel the unease. Dr. Whitby, unusually quiet, stared at his plate as if it held answers. As the dessert plates were cleared, Poirot excused himself, ostensibly to retire. In truth, he lingered in the corridor, his ears attuned to the house's whispers. The storm raged on, and a window at the corridor's end rattled violently, its lock straining against the wind. Poirot approached, testing the latch. It was secure, yet the frame bore fresh scratches, as if someone had tried to force it open or escape through it. Returning to the dining room, he found the guests dispersing, their farewells strained. Lady Beatrice caught his eye, her expression unreadable. "Sleep well, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "Tomorrow promises to be illuminating." Her words, like the chandelier's light, cast more shadows than they dispelled. Poirot retired to his room, the velvet glove weighing heavily in his pocket. The tarnished fork, the blackout, the cry, the glove, the rattling window, each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. Blackthorn Hall was no mere stage for social games. It was a crucible where motives simmered, ready to boil over. As he adjusted his bedside lamp, a distant thud echoed through the walls. The detective smiled grimly. The little grey cells had much work to do. Chapter 3. Whispers of a Poisoned Chalice. The storm had not relented by morning. Its relentless drumming against Blackthorn Hall's windows setting a restless tone for breakfast. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, descended to the conservatory, where glass walls framed a turbulent sky. The room was a jungle of exotic plants, their lush greens a stark contrast to the grey world beyond. The guests already seated around a circular table wore the strained expressions of those who had slept poorly, if at all. Lady Beatrice, resplendent in a mauve morning dress, presided over the meal with her usual authority. "A fine day for reflection, don't you think, Monsieur Poirot?" she said, her smile as polished as the silver chalice on the sideboard. Poirot inclined his head, noting the chalice's ornate design, and a faint irregular discoloration along its rim. Most interesting, he thought, his fingers itching to examine it closer. Lionel Ashford slouched in his chair, his tie askew, nursing a cup of black coffee. "Reflection," he scoffed. "This place is a mausoleum, aunt, full of ghosts and bad investments." His tone was sharp, and Poirot caught the flicker of anger in Lady Beatrice's eyes before she masked it with a sip of tea. Madame Celeste, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, attempted to lighten the mood. "Oh, Lionel, you are too dramatic. This hall is a treasure, no? Like a stage for grand opera." Her laugh was musical, but Poirot noted her glance towards Mr. Harrow, who sat opposite, his fingers drumming on the table. The financier's response was curt. "Treasures can be liabilities, madame. It depends on the ledger." Miss Clara Vaughan, picking at her toast, seemed distracted, her eyes darting to the chandelier visible through the conservatory's open door to the ballroom. "They say it's cursed," she murmured, almost to herself. "The chandelier. My grandmother warned me about objects that hold grudges." Her voice trembled, and Poirot's eyebrows rose. Cursed objects, a curious notion. He resolved to press her later. Dr. Whitby, buttering a scone, chuckled. "Superstition, my dear Clara, though old houses do have their secrets and their remedies." He paused, his eyes meeting Poirot's briefly before returning to his plate. The mention of remedies piqued Poirot's interest, recalling Whitby's cryptic remark about sins of the past the previous night. As the meal progressed, Poirot steered the conversation toward the estate's history, probing gently. Lady Beatrice was evasive, speaking of Blackthorn's proud lineage, but sidestepping details of its financial state. Lionel's smirk suggested he knew more than he let on. Harrow, meanwhile, alluded to a pending transaction involving the estate, his words clipped and vague. Madame Celeste, when asked about her connection to the Ashfords, deflected with a story about a Parisian gala, her charm a shield Poirot could not yet pierce. The detective's attention returned to the silver chalice, which Grayson had just refilled with orange juice. Poirot rose, feigning interest in the conservatory's plants, and approached the sideboard. The chalice was heavier than expected, its surface engraved with roses matching the embroidery on the velvet glove from the previous night. The discoloration on the rim was subtle, greenish, almost imperceptible. A residue, perhaps? Poirot's mind flashed to poisons, to alkaloids that could taint silver without leaving an obvious trace. As he examined the chalice, a young maid, no more than 20, appeared to clear the plates. Her hands shook as she whispered, "Beware the family curses, sir. They linger in the silver." Before Poirot could respond, Grayson materialized, his voice sharp. "Eliza, attend to your duties." The maid scurried away, her apron clutched tightly. Poirot returned to his seat, his mind racing. The chalice, the glove, the tarnished fork from dinner. These were not mere coincidences. He engaged Dr. Whitby in conversation, casually mentioning medicinal herbs. "You are a man of science, Doctor. Have you knowledge of plants that might, say, affect the health adversely?" Whitby's smile was tight. "Oh, many plants can be dangerous in the wrong hands. Foxglove, for instance, or belladonna. But such knowledge is academic here, surely." His tone was too careful, and Poirot filed the comment away. The breakfast concluded with a little fanfare, the guests dispersing to their rooms or the library. Poirot lingered, pretending to admire a blooming orchid, but his eyes were on the chalice. He took a closer look, using his handkerchief to shield his fingers. There, on the chalice's base, was a faint scratch, identical in depth and angle to those on the corridor window from the previous night. Mon Dieu, he thought. A pattern emerges. His musings were interrupted by a piercing scream from the upper floors. The guests froze, heads turning toward the staircase. Lady Beatrice rose, her face pale but composed. "Grayson, see to it," she ordered. The butler hurried upstairs, and Poirot followed at a discreet distance, his cane tapping softly on the marble. The scream had come from Miss Vaughan's room, where she stood trembling, pointing to a shattered mirror on her dressing table. "It wasn't me," she cried. "I found it like this." Poirot's eyes swept the room, noting a single rose petal on the floor, crimson, like the glove. Grayson ushered Miss Vaughan away, but Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the petal. It was fresh, its edges uncurled, as if recently plucked. Back in the corridor, Poirot paused by a portrait of a stern-faced Ashford ancestor, its frame gleaming with silver. The storm outside roared, but it was the storm within Blackthorn Hall that concerned him. The chalice's residue, the maid's warning, the scratched window, the shattered mirror, the rose petal, each was a piece of a puzzle, and Poirot's little grey cells were assembling it with relish. Someone in this house was weaving a web of malice, and the silver chandelier looming in the ballroom seemed to watch it all. As he descended the staircase, the chandelier's crystals caught a flash of lightning, casting jagged shadows across the hall. Poirot's moustache twitched. The game was growing darker, and he was ready to play. Chapter 4. The Midnight Masquerade. The ballroom of Blackthorn Hall was a vision of decadence, its silver chandelier ablaze with candlelight, casting prismatic flecks across the polished floor. Hercule Poirot, resplendent in a Venetian noble's cloak and a gilded half-mask, stood at the edge of the masquerade, his sharp eyes scanning the whirl of costumed guests. The storm outside battered the estate, but within, the music, a lilting waltz, created an illusion of merriment. Yet Poirot, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human nature, sensed the masquerade was more than a dance. It was a stage for deception. Lady Beatrice Ashford, regal as a Renaissance queen in crimson velvet and a jewelled mask, opened the ball with a toast. "To secrets kept and truths unveiled," she said, her voice carrying over the strings. Poirot noted her gaze lingering on a balcony door at the room's far end, its heavy bolt firmly in place. Why such interest in a locked door? He wondered, his moustache twitching. Lionel Ashford, dressed as a jester in motley bells, moved through the crowd with a glass of champagne, his laughter sharp-edged. "A fitting theme, Aunt," he called, loud enough to draw eyes. "This family's built on secrets and bad debts." The barb landed. Lady Beatrice's smile tightened, and several guests shifted uncomfortably. Poirot filed the comment away, recalling Lionel's earlier bitterness about the estate's finances. Madame Celeste, a vision of a siren in flowing azure silk and a feathered mask, glided toward Mr. Reginald Harrow, who wore a cavalier's plumed hat. Her laughter was a melody, but Poirot caught the flicker of calculation in her eyes as she drew Harrow into a dance. Miss Clara Vaughan, in a shepherdess costume, watched from a corner, her fan snapping shut with a force that betrayed her jealousy. Her eyes, unmasked for a moment, burned with something darker than envy. Dr. Ernest Whitby, his plague doctor's mask lending an eerie air, approached Poirot. "A fine spectacle, monsieur," he said, his voice muffled. "But beware, there are toxins in the air tonight." The cryptic remark, paired with his earlier mention of dangerous herbs, set Poirot's little grey cells humming. Was Whitby warning him, or deflecting suspicion? As the waltz swelled, Poirot mingled, his Venetian cape swirling. He overheard fragments of conversation. Harrow murmuring about a lucrative deal to a masked stranger. Lionel mocking the Ashford curse to a giggling debutante, and Miss Vaughan whispering to a maid about haunted lights in the Chandelier. The detective's attention was drawn to a silver hairpin glinting near the chandelier's base, half hidden by a velvet curtain. He retrieved it discreetly, noting a faint greenish stain on its tip, reminiscent of the chalice's residue from breakfast. Another thread, he thought, slipping it into his pocket beside the crimson glove. The music paused, and a rustle of excitement spread through the crowd. Guests began discovering notes slipped into their pockets or tucked into their costumes. Poirot, too, found one in his cloak, written in a hurried scrawl. "The air forges more than signatures." His eyes darted to Lionel, who was reading his own note, his face paling. Across the room, Madame Celeste crumpled hers, her lips tight, while Harrow stuffed his into his pocket with a scowl. Miss Vaughan let out a small cry, dropping her note, which Poirot swiftly retrieved. It read, "Traitor's blood will stain the silver." The chandelier loomed above, its crystals seeming to pulse with menace. The waltz resumed, but the mood had shifted. Masks meant to conceal now seemed to amplify suspicion. Poirot approached Lady Beatrice, inquiring about the balcony door. "A precaution," she said curtly. "The storm makes it unsafe." Yet her fingers twisted her pearl necklace, a telltale sign of unease. Poirot pressed further, asking about the notes. "Childish pranks," she dismissed, but her eyes betrayed doubt. A sudden commotion interrupted the dance. A torn mask, black lace with silver threads, lay discarded on the floor near the chandelier. The crowd parted, whispering. "Whose is it?" Harrow demanded, his voice sharp. No one answered. Madame Celeste's hand strayed to her face, but her mask was intact. Miss Vaughan clutched her shepherdess crook, her eyes wide. Poirot knelt to examine the mask, noting its fine craftsmanship and a faint scent of jasmine. Madame Celeste's perfume, perhaps? As the music faltered, Poirot's gaze returned to the balcony door. To his surprise, it now stood slightly ajar, the bolt undone. He moved swiftly, slipping through the crowd to investigate. The balcony was empty, rain lashing its stone railing, but a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision, disappearing into the garden below. The door's lock bore fresh scratches, identical to those on the chalice and corridor window. Mon Dieu, Poirot thought, the threads tighten. He returned to the ballroom, where the guests were dispersing, their masks no longer hiding their unease. Lady Beatrice announced an early end to the ball, citing the storm. "Rest well," she said, her voice strained. "Tomorrow will bring clarity." Poirot doubted it. Clarity, in his experience, was hard won. As he ascended to his room, the chandelier's light flickered, casting jagged shadows across the staircase. The hairpin, the notes, the torn mask, the unlocked door, each was a piece of a puzzle, growing ever more intricate. Someone was orchestrating chaos. And the silver chandelier, with its silent vigil, seemed to know more than it revealed. Poirot paused at his door, the distant rumble of thunder echoing like a warning. The masquerade had ended, but the true dance of motives and malice was only beginning. He adjusted his mask, now removed, and smiled grimly. The little grey cells were ready for the next step. Chapter 5. Crimson Drops on Polished Silver. The scream that shattered the morning calm of Blackthorn Hall was not one of surprise, but of raw, primal terror. Hercule Poirot, roused from his meticulous morning routine, hastened down the grand staircase, his cane tapping urgently. The sound had come from the ballroom, where the silver chandelier still glittered, now casting its light on a scene of grim finality. Mr. Reginald Harrow lay sprawled on the polished oak floor, his cavalier's costume from the masquerade stained with blood. A dagger, its hilt engraved with a rose motif, protruded from his chest. Above, the chandelier's crystals caught the morning light, but several bore crimson droplets, as if the fixture itself wept for the dead. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Mon Dieu, the stage is set. Lady Beatrice stood near the body, her face pale, but her posture rigid. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, we found him just now. Grayson heard a noise and alerted me. The butler, hovering nearby, nodded, his gaunt face ashen. Lionel Ashford lingered by the doorway, his jester's bells silenced, his eyes darting between the body and the chandelier. Madame Celeste, her siren gown replaced by a sombre black dress, clutched a handkerchief, her sobs loud but oddly rhythmic. Miss Clara Vaughan, supported by a maid, had fainted and was now reviving. Her shepherdess costume crumpled. Dr. Ernest Whitby knelt beside the body, his plague doctor's mask discarded, his hands probing with clinical precision. Poirot approached, his gaze sweeping the scene. The dagger's rose design matched the embroidery on the crimson glove, and the chalice's engravings. A single chandelier crystal lay shattered near Harrow's foot, its edges sharp. A smudged footprint, barely visible in the dust by the velvet curtains, suggested a hasty exit. Most curious was the absence of the study key, which Lady Beatrice had kept on her person. "It was in my reticule last night," she insisted, her eyes flashing. "It's gone." The detective knelt, careful not to disturb the scene, and examined the dagger. "An unusual weapon," he murmured. Dr. Whitby looked up. "Old, likely ceremonial. The blade is sharp, though. Death was swift." Poirot noted the doctor's steady hands, unusual for one claiming to be retired. A man accustomed to blood, perhaps. The guests gathered, their masks of civility stripped away. Lionel's voice was sharp. "Why are we standing here gawking? Someone's a killer!" His defensiveness drew Poirot's attention. Madame Celeste's tears paused long enough for her to snap. "You were quick to hate him, Lionel. Those notes last night. Didn't one accuse? You?" Lionel flushed, his fists clenching. Poirot retrieved a crumpled note from his pocket, one of those slipped into costumes during the masquerade. It read, "The financier knows too much. Blackmail stains deeper than blood." He showed it to Lady Beatrice, whose lips tightened. "Harrow was ambitious," she admitted. "He had dealings with many here, myself included." Poirot's eyebrows rose. Dealings or threats? He questioned the guests, starting with Miss Vaughan, who was now sipping water, her face ghostly. "I saw him arguing with someone last night," she whispered, "near the balcony, after the dance ended. I couldn't see who." Her eyes flicked to Madame Celeste, who was now composed, adjusting her shawl. Poirot turned to the opera singer. "And you, madame, you danced with Monsieur Harrow. Did he share any confidences?" Her smile was brittle. "Only flattery, monsieur. He was a charmer, nothing more." Her denial was too swift, Poirot thought. Dr. Whitby offered little, claiming he'd retired early after the ball. Lionel, however, was less restrained. "Harrow was a vulture," he spat, "always sniffing out weaknesses. He knew about my debts, tried to use them against me." Poirot's little grey cells buzzed. Debts again, and Harrow's knowledge of them. A motive, perhaps? The storm outside raged, trapping the household. Grayson reported all exits locked, the windows secure despite the previous night's scratches. Poirot's attention returned to the chandelier. Its bloodied crystals a silent witness. He climbed a stepladder provided by a trembling maid to inspect them closer. The crimson drops were fresh, some still wet, suggesting the murder occurred just before dawn. A faint scent of jasmine lingered, the same as on the torn mask from the masquerade. As he descended, Poirot's foot brushed against something soft at the ballroom's edge. He bent to retrieve it. A fragment of black lace, edged with silver thread stained with blood. It matched the torn mask perfectly. The killer grows careless, he thought, slipping it into his pocket beside the hairpin and glove. The lace carried the same jasmine scent, pointing to Madame Celeste, or someone clever enough to implicate her. Lady Beatrice rallied the guests, urging calm. "We must trust Monsieur Poirot," she said, though her voice wavered. "The authorities cannot reach us until the storm subsides." Poirot nodded, his mind elsewhere. The missing study key was troubling. Had Harrow been killed to silence him, or to protect a secret locked behind that oak door? He questioned Grayson privately, probing the butler's earlier comment about old debts. Grayson hesitated, then admitted Mr. Harrow was pressing Lady Beatrice about the estate's finances. He claimed to have documents, proof of mismanagement. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Documents, perhaps in the locked study. The butler's reticence suggested he knew more, but feared to speak. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered in the ballroom, the chandelier's light casting long shadows. The footprint, the broken crystal, the bloodied lace, the missing key, each was a thread in a tapestry of murder. Harrow's death was no random act. It was the culmination of a carefully laid plan, and the silver chandelier had borne witness to it all. A clap of thunder shook the hall, and Poirot's gaze lifted to the chandelier. Its crystals seemed to pulse, as if guarding the killer's identity. He adjusted his lapel, his mind racing. The little grey cells were at work, and the truth, he knew, was closer than the killer might hope. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Portrait Gallery. The portrait gallery of Blackthorn Hall stretched like a silent tribunal, its walls lined with stern-faced Ashford ancestors, whose painted eyes seemed to follow Hercule Poirot as he paced. The storm outside roared, its fury trapping the guests within the estate's stone embrace. The murder of Mr. Reginald Harrow had shattered the veneer of civility, and Poirot, ever the orchestrator of truth, had chosen this sombre gallery for his interrogations. The silver chandelier's grim spectacle lingered in his mind, but here, among the portraits, he sought the echoes of motives that led to blood. Lady Beatrice was first, her Renaissance queen's poise intact despite the morning's horror. She sat on a velvet bench, her hands folded as Poirot began. "Madame, you spoke of Monsieur Harrow's interest in the estate's finances. Was there a specific matter he pursued?" Her eyes flickered to a portrait of a dour man in a ruffled collar. Harrow was inquisitive, she said. He uncovered an old will, contested years ago. It favoured a distant cousin over my late brother, Lionel's father. Harrow suggested it might still hold legal weight. Poirot's moustache twitched. A contested will, a potent motive for Lionel, perhaps? Next came Madame Celeste, her black dress a stark contrast to her usual vibrancy. Poirot noted her unease as he asked about her dance with Harrow at the masquerade. A mere flirtation, she insisted, her fingers twisting a sapphire ring. He spoke of investments, nothing more. Yet her eyes avoided Poirot's, and when pressed about a jasmine-scented letter found in Harrow's room, she paled. I wrote no such letter, she snapped, but her voice trembled. A lover scorned, or a liar? Poirot wondered. Miss Clara Vaughan, still shaken, clutched a handkerchief as she sat. Her shepherdess innocence seemed genuine, but her words carried weight. I heard Harrow arguing with someone in the library last night, she whispered. Something about a stolen legacy. I couldn't see who it was, but they were furious. Her eyes darted to the portraits, as if fearing their judgment. Poirot noted her fear, wondering if it stemmed from guilt or terror. Dr. Ernest Whitby, his plague doctor's mask a memory, faced Poirot with calm, vulgar detachment. You spoke of poisons, Doctor, Poirot said, his tone mild. Belladonna, for instance. Could such a substance be concealed in, say, a chalice? Whitby's smile was thin. Theoretically, yes, but I'm a healer, not a poisoner. Poirot's gaze lingered on him, recalling the greenish residue on the chalice and hairpin. A search of the gallery, conducted earlier with Grayson's reluctant assistance, had yielded a discovery. A small vial of belladonna extract, hidden behind the frame of a portrait of Lady Beatrice's grandmother. Whitby's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on his chair. Lionel Ashford was last, his jester's bravado replaced by defiance. Harrow was a leech, he spat, pacing before a portrait of his father. He knew about my debts, threatened to tell Aunt Beatrice unless I paid him off. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And did you pay, monsieur? Lionel's silence was answer enough. The detective pressed further, mentioning the anonymous note accusing Lionel of forgery. Lies! Lionel shouted, his fist grazing the portrait's frame. A slip of paper fell from behind it, scrawled with the words, Betrayal runs in the blood. Poirot pocketed it, noting Lionel's flushed face. The gallery's atmosphere grew heavier with each interrogation, the portrait's gazes seeming to sharpen. Poirot paused before a painting of a young woman, her eyes unnaturally vivid. On closer inspection, he realized they had been altered, painted to follow the viewer. A gentle tap revealed a hollow sound, a peephole, concealed behind the canvas. Someone had been watching, perhaps listening, to secrets shared in this very room. Mon Dieu, Poirot thought, the walls themselves conspire. He questioned Grayson, who hovered nearby, about the peephole. The butler's face remained impassive. The house is old, monsieur. Such quirks are not uncommon. But his eyes flicked to the portrait, betraying unease. Poirot resolved to investigate the hidden passage later, suspecting it led to the locked study or beyond. As the interrogations concluded, the guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the gallery's vastness. Poirot lingered, examining the vial of belladonna. Its label was faded, but the contents were potent, capable of tainting a chalice or hairpin. The lace fragment, the glove, the notes, the peephole, each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit, and Harrow's death was its centerpiece. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the gallery, casting the portraits into stark relief. Poirot's gaze was drawn to the far end, where a shadow moved swiftly, disappearing around a corner. He followed, his cane silent on the carpet, but found only an empty corridor, a single rose petal on the floor, crimson, like the blood on the chandelier. The petal matched the one in Miss Vaughan's room, its freshness suggesting recent placement. Poirot returned to the gallery, his mind racing. The contested, Will, Harrow's blackmail, the poisoned chalice, the spying portrait, each pointed to a killer among the guests, someone weaving a careful web. The chandelier, though absent here, loomed in his thoughts, its bloodied crystals a silent witness to the crime. As he adjusted his tie, preparing to join the others for lunch, a distant creak echoed from the hidden passage. The storm outside roared, but it was the storm within Blackthorn Hall that held Poirot's focus. The little grey cells were piecing together the puzzle, and the truth, he sensed, was tantalizingly close. Chapter 7. The Locked Conservatory Enigma. The conservatory of Blackthorn Hall was a glass-walled jungle, its humid air thick with the scent of earth and exotic blooms. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes at odds with the mossy flagstones, navigated the narrow paths between towering ferns and vibrant orchids. The storm outside battered the panes, but it was the storm within, ignited by Mr. Reginald Harrow's murder, that drove Poirot to this verdant sanctuary. The silver chandelier's bloody tableau lingered in his mind, but here, among the plants, he sought the roots of the killer's motive. The morning after the portrait gallery interrogations, the guests were frayed, their eyes darting like trapped animals. Poirot had requested they gather in the conservatory for further questions, ostensibly to discuss the estate's botanical treasures. In truth, he suspected the room held more than flora. The locked door at its far end, leading to a private greenhouse, intrigued him. Its key, like the study's, was missing. Lady Beatrice arrived first, her composure strained. "This is a place of beauty, Monsieur Poirot," she said, gesturing to a crimson orchid. "Not suspicion." Poirot smiled thinly. "Beauty, madame, often conceals the most dangerous truths." He asked about her whereabouts during the murder. "In my room, resting," she replied. Yet Eliza the maid, hovering nearby with a watering can, muttered, "I saw her ladyship in the hall past midnight." Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. A midnight meeting, Poirot thought. With whom? Lionel Ashford slouched in, his jester's bravado gone. "I was drunk last night," he claimed, rubbing his temples. "Passed out in my room after the ball." Poirot, however, had found a ledger in Lionel's coat pocket during a discreet search. Its neat figures detailing debts to Harrow. Written in a steady hand, not that of a drunken man. "Your memory, monsieur, is perhaps selective," Poirot said, his tone mild but piercing. Lionel's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking to the locked greenhouse door. Madame Celeste entered, her black dress clinging to her like a second skin, the faint scent of jasmine trailing her. Poirot noted its similarity to the ballroom's torn mask and the conservatory's air. "You admire the flowers, madame?" he asked, gesturing to a cluster of lilies. She smiled, but her eyes were wary. "They remind me of Paris," she said, "fragrant but fleeting." Poirot pressed her about her dance with Harrow, mentioning the jasmine-scented letter. Her denial was swift, but her fingers twisted her sapphire ring. A tell, perhaps? Miss Clara Vaughan, pale and trembling, clung to a bench near a rare orchid, its petals dusted with a faint white powder. "These plants," she whispered, "they're cursed. Grandmother said so." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Cursed, mademoiselle, or merely potent?" He brushed the orchid's petals, collecting the powder on his handkerchief. It resembled the belladonna residue from the gallery's vial. A connection, he thought, his gaze shifting to Dr. Whitby. The doctor, his genial mask slipping, stood by a fern, inspecting its fronds. "You know these plants well, Doctor," Poirot said. "Could one conceal a poison, perhaps?" Whitby's laugh was forced. "Many could, in theory, but I'm no gardener of death." His expertise, however, betrayed him. He named the orchid as Orchis mortifera, known for its toxic properties. Poirot's little grey cells hummed. The belladonna vial, the orchid's powder. Whitby's knowledge was too precise. As the guests fidgeted, Poirot explored the conservatory, his cane tapping the flagstones. Near a clay planter shaped like a Grecian urn, he noticed a loose panel. With a gentle push, it opened, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a cufflink, silver and engraved with Harrow's initials, its edge crusted with dried blood. "Mon Dieu," Poirot thought, slipping it into his pocket beside the glove, hairpin and lace. The cufflink tied Harrow to this room, perhaps to his final moments. Grayson, summoned to explain the compartment, claimed ignorance. "The conservatory is old, monsieur, full of quirks." But his eyes avoided Poirot's, and the detective noted a faint tremor in his hands. The butler knew more than he admitted, perhaps about the locked greenhouse door, which bore scratches matching those on the chalice, window, and balcony. Miss Vaughan's voice broke the silence, shrill with panic. "The air here! It's poisoned!" She pointed to the orchid, her hands shaking. Poirot calmed her, but his mind raced. The powder, the cufflink, the locked door, each was a thread in the killer's web. He questioned Eliza, who lingered nervously. "The greenhouse," she whispered, glancing at Grayson. "It's where the old master kept his secrets. Nobody goes in now." Her words were cut short by Grayson's sharp cough. A sudden crash shattered the tension. A glass pane in the conservatory's wall splintered, rain pouring through. Poirot rushed to inspect it, finding a muddy footprint on the floor, identical to the one near Harrow's body. The print led to the locked greenhouse door, which remained secure. Outside, lightning illuminated a figure retreating into the garden, cloaked in shadow. The guests gasped, their alibis unravelling. Lady Beatrice clutched her shawl. Lionel cursed under his breath, and Madame Celeste's hand strayed to her throat. Whitby stared at the footprint, his face unreadable. Poirot's gaze returned to the orchid, its powder a silent accusation. The conservatory, like the chandelier, was a witness to secrets, and the cufflink was proof of a struggle. As Grayson ushered the guests out, citing the broken pane, Poirot lingered, his mind assembling the puzzle. The cufflink, the powder, the footprint, the locked door, each pointed to a killer still among them, their steps growing bolder. The storm's roar matched the urgency of his thoughts. The little grey cells were closing in, and the truth, he knew, was blooming in the shadows. Chapter 8. Threads of Deception in the Library. The library of Blackthorn Hall was a sanctuary of knowledge, its towering shelves laden with leather-bound volumes that smelled of age and secrecy. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes silent on the Persian rug, stood before a roaring fire. The storm's howl muffled by the thick walls. The silver chandelier's grim spectacle and the conservatory's enigmas weighed on his mind, but here, among the books, he sought the threads of deception that bound the murderer to their crime. The guests, summoned for questioning, entered with the wariness of prey, their alibis fraying like old parchment. Lady Beatrice, her mauve dress stark against the library's dark wood, sat rigidly in an armchair. "You were seen in the hall at midnight, madame," Poirot said, his voice gentle but unyielding. "A meeting, perhaps, with Monsieur Harrow?" Her lips tightened. "Very well," she admitted. "He proposed selling the Chandelier to settle debts. I refused, but we argued briefly." Her eyes flicked to a portrait above the fireplace, a stern Ashford patriarch. Poirot noted the admission, wondering if her refusal had provoked Harrow's killer. Lionel Ashford slouched by a shelf, his defiance barely masking panic. Poirot produced the ledger from the conservatory, its forged entries detailing payments to Harrow. "These figures, monsieur, suggest you falsified records to hide your debts," Poirot said. Lionel's face reddened. "Harrow forced me to," he muttered. "He had proof, letters, documents, said he'd ruin me." Poirot's eyebrows rose. Blackmail again, and documents that might lie within this very room. Madame Celeste, her black gown shimmering, leaned against a desk, her jasmine scent filling the air. Poirot held up the letter found in Harrow's room, its jasmine fragrance unmistakable. "You denied writing this, madame, yet it speaks of a broken promise. Care to explain?" Her eyes flashed. "A youthful indiscretion," she said, her voice low. "Harrow and we knew each other in Paris. He threatened to expose it." Her admission was reluctant, but Poirot sensed truth, and a motive born of shame. Miss Clara Vaughan, clutching a shawl, hovered near a window, her eyes darting to the shelves. "I saw things," she whispered, "through the portrait gallery's peephole. People sneaking into the library at night. I thought, cursed books." Her fear was genuine, but Poirot pressed her. "Who did you see, mademoiselle?" She shook her head, trembling. "Shadows, only shadows." Her vagueness was frustrating, yet her mention of the peephole suggested she knew more than she admitted. Dr. Ernest Whitby, his genial facade thinning, stood by a shelf of botanical journals. "You have a scholar's mind, doctor," Poirot said. "These texts, do they speak of poisons, perhaps?" Whitby's smile was strained. "Some do, yes. Old herbals, nothing more." Poirot's gaze fell on a torn page protruding from a volume, its text detailing belladonna extraction. The page was dusted with the same white powder as the conservatory's orchid. "A coincidence, doctor?" Poirot asked. Whitby's silence was telling. As the guests shifted uneasily, Poirot explored the library, his cane tapping the floor. A bookshelf near the fireplace seemed misaligned, its edges worn. With a gentle push, it swung inward, revealing a small safe embedded in the wall. Grayson, summoned to open it, hesitated before producing a key. Inside was a document, a will, dated a decade ago, naming a distant cousin as Blackthorn's heir, bypassing Lionel's father. The signature was shaky, likely forged. Mon Dieu, Poirot thought, a motive for murder. The safe also contained a silver key, etched with a rose matching the study's lock. Poirot pocketed it, noting Grayson's unease. "This was hidden for a reason," he said, his eyes on Lady Beatrice. She paled but said nothing. The will, combined with Harrow's blackmail, pointed to Lionel, or someone protecting the estate's legacy. Poirot's attention returned to the torn botanical page. Its precise instructions for extracting poison suggested intent, not scholarship. The powder matched the orchids and the belladonna vial's residue, linking the library to the conservatory and the chandelier's bloodied crystals. The killer was weaving a careful web, but their threads were tangling. He questioned Grayson about the safe. The butler's voice was low. "The old master kept sensitive papers there. I thought it empty." His eyes avoided Poirot's, and the detective sensed another half-truth. The library, like the conservatory, was a repository of secrets, and the study, now accessible with the found key, beckoned. As the interrogations concluded, a muffled thud echoed from the direction of the locked study, just beyond the library's wall. The guests froze, their faces a gallery of fear and guilt. Poirot moved swiftly, his cane silent, but the study door remained locked, the key in his pocket untested. He turned to the guests. "Remain here," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Stepping into the corridor, Poirot approached the study, the figure thud's echo lingering. Lightning flashed, illuminating a figure retreating down the hall cloaked in shadow. The rose petal from the gallery, the footprint from the conservatory, the lace from the ballroom, all pointed to a killer still active, their steps growing reckless. Poirot returned to the library, the safe's contents and the botanical page weighing heavily in his mind. The forged will, the poison text, the jasmine letter, the hidden key, each was a thread in a tapestry of betrayal, and the silver chandelier's crimson drops were its centerpiece. The study, he resolved, would yield the next clue. As he adjusted his tie, the storm's roar matched the urgency of his thoughts. The little grey cells were weaving the threads together, and the killer, he knew, was running out of shadows to hide in. Chapter 9. The Storm's Reckoning at Dawn. The first light of dawn crept through Blackthorn Hall's windows, pale and fractured by the storm's unrelenting fury. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, the silver key from the hidden safe clutched in his hand, its rose engraving a silent echo of the chandelier's bloody witness. The guests, summoned once more, were a tableau of frayed nerves. Lady Beatrice, her composure brittle, Lionel, his defiance tinged with desperation, Madame Celeste, her jasmine scent now cloying, Miss Clara Vaughan, trembling like a leaf, and Dr. Ernest Whitby, his genial mask slipping. The murder of Reginald Harrow had unravelled their facades, and Poirot's little grey cells were poised to expose the killer. The library's air was thick with accusation. Lady Beatrice, her eyes blazing, turned on Lionel. "You forged that will, didn't you?" she snapped, gesturing to the document from the safe. "You'd do anything to secure Blackthorn." Lionel's laugh was bitter. "Me? You're the one who met Harrow in secret, aunt, selling the chandelier behind my back." The revelation stunned the room. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "A deal, madame?" he asked. Lady Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "Harrow offered to clear our debts. I considered it, for the family." Her voice wavered, betraying guilt. Madame Celeste, cornered by Poirot's earlier probing, cracked under pressure. "Enough lies!" she cried, her accent thickening. "Harrow and I were lovers in Paris years ago. He threatened to tell everyone unless I helped him." Her eyes flicked to Miss Vaughan, whose face twisted with rage. "You stole him from me!" Clara shrieked, lunging forward. Grayson restrained her, but Poirot noted her fury, a motive he hadn't fully considered. Dr. Whitby, pressed about the greenhouse, grew defensive. "I studied plants, yes," he said, his voice tight, "but I didn't poison anyone." Poirot held up the torn botanical page, its poison extraction details damning. "This was found with your belladonna vial, doctor, and the orchid's powder matches." Whitby's hands trembled, but he insisted, "I'm no killer." Poirot wasn't convinced. The doctor's expertise was too convenient. With the guests at odds, Poirot led them to the study, the key heavy in his pocket. The oak door creaked open, revealing a room of dark wood and faded tapestries. A desk held a ledger, its pages detailing Harrow's blackmail, payments from Lionel, compromising letters from Celeste, and threats to expose Lady Beatrice's financial ruin. A note, scrawled in Harrow's hand, read, "The chandelier hides the truth." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The chandelier again. A bookcase caught his attention, its panels misaligned. With a gentle push, it swung open, revealing a narrow passage leading to the portrait gallery's peephole. Mon Dieu, Poirot thought, the spy's path. Near the passage's exit, he found a bloodied handkerchief, embroidered with a rose, its fabric matching the crimson glove and lace fragment. The killer's signature was clear, but their identity remained elusive. The guests crowding behind gasped at the discovery. "Someone's been watching us," Miss Vaughan whispered, her fear palpable. Lionel's face paled, and Madame Celeste clutched her shawl, her jasmine scent mingling with the passage's musty air. Lady Beatrice's voice was sharp. "This is madness, Monsieur Poirot. Who would do this?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Someone who fears the truth, madame." As he examined the ledger, a second scream pierced the air, coming from the ballroom. Poirot led the charge, the guests trailing in panic. The silver chandelier loomed, its crystals glinting ominously. At its base lay a shattered crystal, freshly stained with blood, though no body was present. The floor bore a faint smear, leading toward the balcony door, unlocked despite Grayson's earlier assurances. Poirot knelt, his handkerchief collecting the crystal. The blood was wet, suggesting a recent act. "Another warning," he murmured, his eyes scanning the guests. Lionel's hands were clenched. Celeste's face was a mask of dread, and Whitby's calm seemed forced. Miss Vaughan whimpered, pointing to the chandelier. "It's cursed! It sees everything!" Poirot's gaze lingered on her, wondering if her fear concealed guilt. Grayson reported the balcony door's lock intact, but Poirot found fresh scratches, matching those on the conservatory pane and study key. The killer was moving, leaving clues in their haste. He stepped onto the balcony, the storm's wind tearing at his coat. Lightning flashed, revealing a cloaked figure sprinting toward the garden's yew trees, their forms swallowed by shadow. Back in the ballroom, Poirot faced the guests, their faces a gallery of suspicion. "The killer is among us," he said, his voice steady. "They strike, then flee, but their web unravels." Lady Beatrice clutched her pearls. Lionel cursed, and Celeste's eyes darted to the door. Whitby's silence was deafening, and Clara's trembling suggested more than fear. The ledger, the handkerchief, the passage, the bloodied crystal. Each was a thread in the killer's tapestry, woven with precision but fraying under Poirot's scrutiny. The chandelier, its crimson drops a silent witness, seemed to pulse with secrets. As the storm raged, Poirot's mind raced, the little grey cells assembling the final pieces. The reckoning was near, and the killer, he knew, was running out of time. Chapter 10. The little grey cell's verdict. The storm over Blackthorn Hall had quieted to a murmur, its final gusts rattling the ballroom's windows. As Hercule Poirot stood beneath the silver chandelier, its bloodied crystals catching the morning light. The guests, Lady Beatrice, Lionel Ashford, Madame Celeste, Miss Clara Vaughan, and Dr. Ernest Whitby, faced him, their expressions a mix of dread and anticipation. Grayson, the butler, stood by the door, his gaunt face unreadable. The murder of Reginald Harrow had cast a shadow over the estate, but Poirot's little grey cells had unravelled the web of deceit. It was time for the verdict. "Monsieur et Mesdames," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, "a crime has been committed, a life taken beneath this very chandelier. But the truth, it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot." He paced, his cane tapping the polished floor. Let us review the threads of this tapestry. A crimson glove, a silver hairpin, a vial of belladonna, a forged will, a bloodied cufflink, a secret passage, and notes of betrayal. Each points to a killer among us. He turned to Lionel, whose jester's bravado was gone. Monsieur Ashford, your debts to Harrow were a motive, yes? The ledger, forged to hide your ruin, was found in the conservatory. You claimed drunkenness, but your handwriting was steady. Lionel's face reddened. I didn't kill him, he protested. Poirot nodded. Indeed, your anger was real, but not your method. Next he faced Madame Celeste, her jasmine scent faint but unmistakable. Madam, your letter to Harrow spoke of a broken promise, a Parisian affair. He blackmailed you, threatening to expose your past. Her eyes widened, but she remained silent. Yet your grief, it was theatrical, non? A distraction, perhaps, but not murder. Miss Vaughan trembled, her shepherdess innocence frayed. Mademoiselle, you spied through the portrait gallery's peephole, fearing cursed books, but you saw more. Harrow's arguments, yes? Your rage at his attentions to Madame Celeste was fierce. Clara's voice was a whisper. I hated him, but I couldn't. Poirot's gaze softened. Your heart betrayed you, but not your hands. Lady Beatrice, regal despite the strain, met his eyes. Madam, you met Harrow in secret, discussing the sale of this chandelier to save Blackthorn. The missing study key, the forged will, it pointed to your desperation. She stiffened. I would never kill for money. Poirot inclined his head. No, your pride is your shield, not your weapon. Finally, he turned to Dr. Whitby, whose genial facade had crumbled. Doctor, your knowledge of poisons, belladonna, the orchid's powder, was too precise. The vial in the portrait gallery, the torn page in the library, the conservatory's secrets, all led to you. Whitby's smile was forced. Conjecture, monsieur. I'm a healer. Poirot's eyes gleamed. But also an heir, non? He produced the bloodied handkerchief, its rose embroidery matching the glove, lace and dagger. This was found in the passage, doctor, along with a cufflink bearing Harrow's initials. But the final clue... He paused, drawing a silver watch from his pocket, engraved with a rose and Whitby's initials. This was in your room, hidden beneath a floorboard. Its hands stopped at 4:17 a.m., the time of Harrow's death. The room gasped. Poirot continued, his voice relentless. You, doctor, are a distant Ashford cousin, named in the contested will found in the library. Harrow discovered this, threatening to expose you unless you paid. But you chose another path. Poison. Belladonna in his wine, administered during the masquerade's blackout. The dagger was a ruse, plunged post-mortem to mislead. The chandelier's blood, the passage, the notes, all were your misdirection. Whitby's face contorted. You have no proof, he shouted. Poirot held up the watch. This stopped when you struggled with Harrow, his blood staining your cufflink. You fled through the passage, leaving the handkerchief, but your haste betrayed you. Whitby's shoulders sagged, his voice low. He'd have taken everything. My birthright. The confession hung heavy, the chandelier's crystals glinting as if in judgment. Lady Beatrice clutched her pearls, Lionel cursed, and Celeste's eyes filled with tears. Clara sobbed, while Grayson's stoic mask cracked. Poirot faced them all. The little grey cells, they see what the heart conceals. Justice will follow. As Grayson restrained Whitby, awaiting the authorities' arrival with the storm's end, Poirot stepped onto the balcony. The sky was clearing, the garden's yews no longer hiding shadows. The chandelier, cleansed of blood, sparkled behind him. He adjusted his moustache, reflecting on the human heart's capacity for deceit and the clarity of truth. Blackthorn Hall was silent at last, its secrets laid bare. The little grey cells had prevailed, and Poirot, ever the servant of justice, was content